आप लोग सीख रहे हैं ना? यही हमारा मकसद है। Welcome to another session, which is, I guess, what is the session name? I don't know actually. But Professor Parala is going to take the session. He's professor from University of Hyderabad. Please welcome Professor Parala on stage with a big round of applause. So now I would like to hand over the stage to the Parala sir. Without further ado. Sir.
So slides आप change करेंगे? Can I change the slides myself or is there if there is a slide changer, I could do it. Yeah. Yeah. No, not this. Yeah. Can I just try the slides? काम कर रहा है? I don't know if the battery is there or. Yeah, it's working. Okay. Okay. I know we are running a bit late, but let me try and stick to the topic that was given to me. I know as you are getting hungry for lunch, people tend to get angry. So I'll try and not keep you here for too long. So this is about how do we evaluate community radio? Yeah, because community radio now in the country is about 20 plus years old. There are many stations that are, I mean, of course, Anna University is about 20 years old, but there are many stations in the country which are 10 to 15 years old who have at least done broadcasting for 3-4 years. So it's time. We felt almost 10 years back when we started this work at the UNESCO chair on community media, which I coordinated University of Hyderabad. We thought it is time the stations themselves started looking at how they are doing. Not some outsiders asking questions, but the stations themselves evaluating through a self-assessment kind of a process. Yeah. So for those of you who are newly getting oriented to community radio, this session will be a little bit of a leap even before you learnt about the technical aspects from Dr. Ramarao Garu. Ideally, maybe they could have been exposed to some technical aspects, but let's assume that there are stations already running. How do we understand how they are doing? Yeah, and what kind of methods do we use? Now, if you look at methods of evaluation of anything, whether the work of an NGO, a development agency, the work of IMC, could be anything, the work of the university as a whole. The dominant approaches to evaluation focus a lot on what is the impact. And they try to look at what are the short-term changes that have come about because of that particular thing that you are evaluating, an organization, institution, a program, or whatever. And usually they are trying to look at, I have done this, and what changes has it brought about? A direct cause and effect kind of a relationship. And social scientists for a long time had a lot of difficulty establishing what caused what. Right? It's not easy to establish. Now, a radio station in West Bengal, in interior West Bengal, is running a program on uh, girl children and education, let us say, right? And trying to keep girl children in school, preventing them from dropping out, enrolling more girl children, and so on. Now, after 2 years of that programming, some donor who gave money for this wants to know to what extent has this program influenced girl child enrollment and retention. Now, when you look at the numbers, you know that, yeah, it has gone up. Let's say in 2 years, more girl children are now going to school, staying in school. Now, how do we know this is because of the radio program? That A has caused B, it's not easy to establish. A lot of other things are happening there. There are NGOs, there are social movements that are advocating for girl children to go to school, to stay in school. There is Mamtadi's programs encouraging girl children to continue in school. She actually provides financial incentives to families that are sending girl children to, and so on and so forth. There are multiple factors involved in that. To isolate the influence of radio program alone is not easy. So impact questions are a little complicated. What I am advocating here is a slightly different approach to evaluating the role of community radio, more in terms of the process that is followed by community radios, assessing how they do what they do. Do they do it right? Do they do it in a way that reflects the key principles of community radio? Or to what extent do they fall short of those processes? So the alternative approaches that many of us are advocating are more participatory, not some outside researcher parachuting into the community and asking all these tough questions. And many times donor agencies send people, सब वहाँ जाके मालूम करके आ जाओ कैसा चल रहा है सब कुछ, are they doing things all right and so on. It creates a lot of anxiety. Outsiders are coming. What if we lose funding from next year? All this. Instead of all that, what we are suggesting is a self-assessment process by the radio stations themselves. Yeah. Now that community radio has been around for a while, like I said, a lot of people are interested in finding out how community radio stations are doing. There are quite a few toolkits now available for evaluation of community radios. I've given you some examples. There is something called the self-assessment toolkit developed by Jaya Chittur. I think when Dr. Sreedher was at CEMCA, he was a director of CEMCA in Delhi when they have done this work. Then there is the community radio self-assessment guide developed by an NGO called IdeoSync Media Combined outside Delhi in Faridabad. Then there is a toolkit in Nepal that was developed by the Community Radio Broadcasters Association in Nepal. That is the community MHZ, Assessing Community Radio Performance in Nepal. And there is a toolkit that we at the UNESCO Chair on Community Media developed. Now it is about 10 years old. And it has gone into a second version. This is what it is. Community Radio Continuous Improvement Toolkit, right? It is also available in Hindi. It's translated as Samudayak Radio Nirantar Sudhar Toolkit. I guess they couldn't find a word for toolkit in Hindi. But anyway, there are also crowdsourced translations of this toolkit. I think in Tamil, in Malayalam, the radio stations themselves have done translations of this. It is available free to download in Creative Commons for people to use. We have also done a version for Bangladesh community radios on their request, and there is a Bangla version available for Bengali stations in Bangladesh. We have done some work in East Africa with the East African Community Media Network, and we developed an East African version of this toolkit. In fact, there are 5 national versions in East Africa. Tanzania, Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda, uh, and Kenya. 5 East African countries. Each of them have their own national version of this toolkit, because some things differ from country to country. We had to contextualize it. There is a German version which the German free radios are using. They have translated into German. Because it is in German, community radios in Austria, who also speak German, are also using this toolkit. Most recently, about a year ago, I did a workshop with community radios in UK, and a bunch of 20 stations that attended the workshop have now adapted the toolkit to UK conditions, and they are trying to use that. Okay, so I mean, this is just to tell you that you develop something and you have no control over it. This is something that has happened without our pushing for it. I mean, we are not into promotion. We are primarily into research and advocacy, and so we do our work, but it has taken a life of its own. I should also mention, I don't know if Ameejay is still patiently sitting somewhere, but the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting some years ago has also recommended using of this toolkit by radio stations, and they have gone through 2 or 3 cycles of peer review using this toolkit. Yeah, at one stage they were recommending that every station should go through that, which was not our intention. We wanted it to be voluntary, but the way government and ministry does things is always you must and you should, right? So there's some stations have started using it. Okay, there are 2 principles based on which we are advocating this method of assessment. One is that continuous improvement. What is the idea of continuous improvement? However well you are doing, or you think you are doing as a station, you can do better. It is a process of continuous improvement. Yeah, so that is one principle. And the second principle is co-learning. That however well you are doing, however experienced you are, when you sit with other radio stations, you learn something from them, and they take away some learning from you. It is a co-learning approach. So we want to see community radio stations as colleagues in this revolution of community voices who can learn from each other. They're all co-learners on this journey. So our approach is based on these 2 principles: continuous improvement and co-learning. Okay, so what does the toolkit do? Community Radio Continuous Improvement Toolkit, CRCIT for short. It allows community radio stations to assess themselves from time to time without external people parachuting and coming and examining them, like school inspectors or whatever. And it always scares people when outside inspectors come. They are not there. The stations periodically assess themselves, and it focuses on principles of community radio, the various practices of community radio, and what are the processes followed in the radio station, whether it reflects adequately the philosophy and principles of community radio or not. Now, what we have done is, in whichever country we have worked on the toolkit, we took the national community radio policy guidelines into account. Because after everything we do, Amitji sitting in Delhi in the MIB, he pushes the buttons. There are policy guidelines. We can't go beyond that. We can't violate those guidelines. That every radio station must be conscious of. So should your MANUU radio team also be aware of all those guidelines. The second set of things we took into consideration, there are certain non-negotiable principles of community radio all over the world. What do I mean by non-negotiables? There is no discussion on those principles. That is universally accepted, right? And what are they? Community participation and ownership should be there. And sometimes community ownership is a bit tricky. So at least community management that community members are involved in the management of the radio station, that what Dr. Sreedher was talking about, the vulnerable groups, the marginalized groups have access to your radio station, right? Gender equity, absolutely important. And Kanchan, my colleague, who does a lot of work on gender and community radio, will tell you some of the most phenomenal community radio broadcasters today in the country are all women. Yeah, so women play a very big role in community radio all over the country, and there are a lot of good examples of women broadcasters internationally as well, right? So gender equity is very important. The content is community generated. Yeah, what Dr. Sreedhar also mentioned, that we want not just the mass comm students who are learning how to do broadcasting to do the programming. We want everybody to be able to do programming. The community of listeners. There are no listeners and receivers in community radio. Listeners can also be producers, right? And we should try and generate content from the community. The emphasis is on local cultures, local identities, right? If you are in Hyderabad, you are located here, you are catering to a certain community. I mean, I don't know, once the tower is up, we'll see how your transmitter works. Could possibly 10 to 15 kilometer radius. Pretty good. I mean, in this direction, you'll probably go up to Medipatnam, yeah, or beyond. Yeah, in this direction, you'll go up to BHEL or beyond. Yeah, and this side maybe Rajendra Nagar. We don't know. That's your community. And what are the issues that are important to people in this area? All these IT guys who live around here, can we do something about their lives and their cultures? So everybody who lives in the shadow of the station, they matter. Yeah. And the station follows some amount of transparency and accountability in practice. Right? Okay, these are the 9 components that we have listed out in the toolkit. Content generation and programming, policies and guidelines. It hasn't changed. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, please tell me if I'm forgetting to change the slide. Yeah. So content generation and programming is the first parameter, and I'll say a little bit about each of them quickly. Policies and guidelines, number 2. Volunteers, technology, in terms of access and management of technology, the on-air standards of broadcasting, governance of the station, feedback and grievances, content sharing and networking. Finally, what Dr. Sreedhar is going to talk about later, sustainability, revenue generation, financial accountability of the station is also very important. Because the station can talk about big things about democracy, voice, accountability in society. But if the station itself is not accountable, if the station itself is not transparent, not very democratically run, then you are violating the first principle. Yeah. Okay. And you will see each of those parameters. I mean, you will get more details if you access the toolkit. Things like participation, inclusion, gender, and capacity building cut across all the 9 parameters. We don't need separate parameters for this because every parameter must have all of this. The idea of participation, what Dr. Sreedhar was saying, the idea of inclusivity, about women's involvement and training and capacity building of communities, all of these cut across. So we put in each parameter a set of indicators. There are a set of questions which the station can ask itself and tick whichever is relevant to them, right? Every indicator focuses on principles, practices, or processes. And remember that the toolkit does not seek to create a competitive environment. It is not about comparing my station with yours, right? We are running a station not too far from here, Bhopal, Hyderabad, which is admittedly not running very well. But it's not about comparing the MANUU radio with Bhopal, Hyderabad. Each of them are doing their thing, but each of them can sit by themselves and see how they are doing and can they improve on what they are doing. So let's look at content generation and programming, the first parameter. The key factor here is inclusivity of people at all stages of programming and production. Are only a couple of experts who are previously trained in All India Radio or commercial FM radio doing all the production? Or are there members of your community who are involved in program production? So for MANUU Radio, who would be the community? Who would be the immediate community? Exactly. Many times, stations that are located in campuses don't think of the community that resides right here as community. They start looking outside the gate, saying, the vegetable vendors, the rickshawalas, they are the community. Yes, they are also a community, part of your listening community, but start by your own immediate community, your own students, your own staff, your faculty. So think of communities as concentric circles. One immediate community, one community just outside, one community a little farther. Now, if you conceptualize community like that, you will then create strategies for content generation from each of those communities. Yeah, how much are students bringing? How much are the community of, for example, Radioactive in Bangalore used to work with rag pickers not too far from their station. There was a large rag picking community, and they had their own issues and so on. They brought them in. The transgender community and so on. Right. So there are several communities that you can conceptualize and see how they can be included. The key factor of measurement of the station, whether it's doing well or not, is in terms of diversity of its content. How diverse it is in representing the various communities which are in the listening area. Yeah, that's the important part. The second parameter is to do with policies and guidelines. One is to what extent are the staff members of the station aware of the policy guidelines. You can't let anybody go on air before they know what is the All India Radio programming code. They can commit all kinds of atrocities if they are not familiar with it. You might say something casually in a conversation, but say it on air, you can get into big trouble. Yeah, and you can get the station into big trouble. Yeah, it's the station's responsibility to make sure every staff member, every broadcaster, every volunteer is aware of the policies and guidelines of the government to begin with and make sure there are no violations. Also, many stations go beyond the state guidelines and come up with their own policies. For example, one station says, we shall not take any advertisements from chemical fertilizers and pesticides. That's a policy, because advertising is permitted on community radio. But what kind of advertising, they can decide, right? They have a policy saying we shall do a lot of programming that promotes the welfare of senior citizens. That is a policy. What Dr. Sreedher was talking about earlier, right? They also will have ethical codes. Stations can have ethical codes. For example, you probably at the institution level are familiar with ICC, Internal Complaints Committee, the Committee Against Sexual Harassment, whatever it's currently called. The station must have its own set of codes, that the station will not have gender discrimination, that it will allow women to participate at every level, right? It will allow people of all communities to come and do programming. These are a set of codes of practice that the station should and could establish, right? Now, if they don't have it, when they are doing the self-assessment, they can say, oh, we don't have a code about women's involvement. So why don't we put together a small policy statement for the station, right? So set of policies and guidelines, to what extent stations have them, to what extent new policies and guidelines they should adopt. So when they sit with that thermometer measuring how they are doing, they can check on this. Yeah. Volunteers. Any community radio, uh, any community radio enthusiast and activist will tell you that volunteers are the lifeblood of community radios. Yeah, not paid staff. Yeah, there may be one paid staff, two paid staff, depending on how much you can afford and how much the institution supports you and so on. But the station ultimately, its success lies in volunteers, people who contribute to community radio but are not on payrolls. A few months ago, I visited a 40-year-old community radio station in Brisbane, Australia, where there were 6 paid staff members, and you don't believe it, 300 volunteers. It's a 24/7 radio station. And so I met a school teacher who says she comes every Saturday because that's her off. And she has a program that she just comes, sits at the microphone and does her program. And she goes away. She comes next Saturday. And there is an IT worker who is off on some day. He comes and contributes one program and so on. Why? Because they are part of that community and they think they can contribute something to this. Yeah. So when they come, they get to have some tea, coffee, whatever, have a snack or something with the station and go away. Nothing paid. Right. So this is the backbone of any station. How active is the station in generating volunteers, a volunteer force, and are they getting new volunteers all the time? Because volunteers, there's a huge turnover. People come today, they are gone tomorrow. So we must have a constant program to enlist volunteers, yeah, and train them properly. Yeah, and it helps reduce costs for the station. And what it also does is volunteers are also members of the community, which means they feel good that they are contributing something. And as a community member, I come and do a program. My family members, my friends, all of them are going to listen to the station. That also will happen, right? So there's a big advantage of having a volunteer force. Technology access and management. So the previous issue about volunteers, if the station is looking at how well it is doing, the questions under that parameter tries to measure them in terms of the number of volunteers they have and what all do volunteers do at the station. Then it can say, we don't have enough volunteers. We haven't got a new volunteer in the last 2 years. They can try and improve that aspect. That's the idea. Let's go quickly to technology access and management. Technology, all said and done, is expensive. It is very difficult to get the equipment in the first place. You are still struggling to set up the tower. And even after the equipment is here, one needs to handle it very carefully, and community radios, because the non-specialists all handle the equipment, right? We should be extra careful about how technology is handled. The second thing is, because it is difficult, we cannot keep away people from technology, from handling technology. What happens typically in a lot of mixed gender settings, women are kept away from handling technology because unko pata nahi hota hai, the guys will do everything. They know the wiring and they know the circuits and all that kind of thing. How did that come about? There is nothing natural about women not being comfortable with technology. Historically, women have been kept away from technology. If you give them access, they will do as good as the men, right? Similarly, the poor, the non-literate, some of the greatest broadcasters in community radio that we know haven't passed even 10th standard in many cases. And they are very good in handling technology, right? Because they have understood how these buttons work and they go by visual cues when they do editing and all of that. The station must demystify technology. The station cannot make technology look like it's a specialized job for which you need to be trained in triple IT or something. It is very simple. We keep saying you can be a community broadcaster in 1 week. The rest you can learn on the job. Yeah, we must have that confidence that every person given access to technology can be a community broadcaster. There's nothing. It's not rocket science. Yeah, I mean, we have friends here who have spent a lifetime in radio production. Uh, some of them may differ with this, but it is an issue about providing a channel for people to discover their innate talents, right? And technology access is central to that. Uh, so building capacities of your staff members and volunteers is a constant process that needs to happen. So sometimes a community broadcaster we know, when we talk to her, she says, I'm not learning anything new. I'm really bored. Can you get somebody to teach us how to do a radio drama? This is aspirational. They want to keep building their capacities, right? And a good dynamic radio station should keep trying to do that. Keep building capacities of your volunteers and staff, because they think then that they're learning something new all the time. Yeah. Oops. कहाँ चले गए? Gone too far ahead, I think. Yeah. On-air standards of broadcasting. This I have already mentioned, that there are a set of policy guidelines. What can go on air, what can't go on air. It's very important. All India Radio Broadcasting Code is there. You shall not broadcast any content that is unfriendly, to provoke enmity between neighboring countries. There are all kinds of codes. Ramarao will know that. You cannot comment anything negative about other communities. You can't name them. You can't make fun of other communities and those kinds of things, right? There are advertising rules and guidelines which are standard. I mean, even for regular media, they have that. Now, can the station go beyond these guidelines and come up with their own codes? They can. I mean, you stick to all of them, and you want to be stricter about some things, you create your own codes. Yeah, beyond that. But primarily, you should follow those guidelines to begin with. And you also make sure that your stakeholders, the broadcasters, the volunteers, students who are coming in and going, everybody is aware of these guidelines. And there are corrective mechanisms in place if somebody violates these guidelines, right? I mean, I'm not advocating throwing out people for one small violation, but there are ways in which you handle that. Call them, counsel them, educate them, tell them that these are the issues, you shouldn't do this again, and so on. Governance is a slightly tricky thing for institutional radio stations like MANUU Radio. But if you are looking at community radios, especially started by NGOs and civil society organizations, it becomes a little more challenging. To what extent is decision making participatory? Who decides things, right? Who decides that morning 7 a.m. we will start with this program, right? Evening content will be this. We shall have this much percentage of programming on these issues. How do all these decisions happen, right? If you have a managing committee for the radio station that is inclusive, that has membership of the different stakeholders, that there is student representative, there is a staff representative, maybe one or two civil society organizations outside the campus are also members. So people have a voice in decision making. So you must have a management advisory committee in place, which meets from time to time and takes decisions. Yeah, and they have fixed tenures. Then you get a new set of people, not the same set of people forever. Right? How frequently do they meet? How are decisions implemented? These are all important. Yeah. So governance also is one way in which you can judge how well a community radio station is running. Feedback and grievances. Community radio, by its very nature, is not about a set of experts spreading gyan to people who don't have any gyan. The classic All India Radio agriculture programs of the past or health programs used to be run like that. You bring in an agriculture expert, you bring in a health expert who will tell you everything: how to manage your bodies, how to manage your crops, and so on and so forth, how to grow more food. Yeah. And mostly it was about fertilizers and pesticides and all that. Now we know the problems with all that. Now, if you run a community radio, then the community's voice, what they think and feel about your station, about your content, are very central. They may not always have a grievance, but they may have feedback to give. You know, ये program अच्छा लगता है, इसका timing थोड़ा बढ़ा दो, right? Can we get repeat of this content? You broadcast it only on Monday, but can you also broadcast it another day in the week? Because we'll get to hear. Otherwise, I go to work during Mondays. Whatever. Now, this is all very useful feedback and suggestions from the audience. And as I said, the audience are your community, and you work with community regularly. So feedback mechanism, grievance mechanism should be in place. If you have a website, for example, put a channel there where people can give feedback. If you are doing a phone-in program, a live phone-in program, open up some time during the phone-in program so people can call in with their suggestions and feedback and so on, right? And there should be some mechanism to collate, to analyze all this feedback from time to time. You don't have to do it every day, but once a month, once in 2 months, can you just look at what feedback is coming and see if you need to change anything in the way you are doing your broadcasting? So to what extent does the station have these mechanisms, and do they take any actions on this feedback, is another measure of how well a community radio station is running. Content sharing and networking. Now, as I said, community radio is not a competitive field. We are not in this sector, for grabbing eyeballs, or in this case, their ears. For who is listening to Bol Hyderabad more, who is listening to Manu Radio more, it doesn't matter, right? We are all in it for communities and community solidarity. So where necessary, can stations network with each other, work in solidarity? For example, 6 stations in the Bundelkhand region in Madhya Pradesh and UP worked together some years ago on a common set of programs on climate change. I forget now what was the Hindi word, Jalvayu Parivartana, whatever. Yeah, so they came up with their own vocabulary and produced a set of programs, each station, and they exchanged the content because it is very relevant to all of them. Now, that kind of networking is very healthy, right? If you are doing programming in Urdu, if there are other Urdu stations, can you share content with them, right? That should be possible. And you can also build linkages with other organizations, institutions. I just mentioned NGOs outside who are also working with community welfare. Can we bring them in, right? There is a senior citizens forum or something nearby. Can we work with them to generate content about senior citizens, and so on? So that's a networking. In India, the policy guidelines suggest 50% of the content should be produced within the local community by the local community. The rest of the content can come from outside. When I say outside, I don't want you to think, BBC wala, free mein program de raha hai to leke dalenge. He'll give, BBC will give, Radio Deutsche Welle will give, all this will give, but that's too distant. It's too alien for our culture, our society. But we can network with similar stations, with similar organizations, and can we use their content? It's possible. Yeah. So networking with national and international bodies. There is a Community Radio Association of India, of which you can be a member, and you get certain benefits from that. They get projects from time to time. You can also get to network with other stations. There are organizations like AMARC, which is a World Association of Community Radio Broadcasters. There is a very active Asia Pacific wing of AMARC. So one can become members of these networks, right? I mean, to what extent is the station plugged into different networks? And to what extent does it work in isolation? Is also another measure of how well a community radio station is doing. Yeah. Okay, the last parameter. I know people are beginning to get hungry. Uh, just pay attention to this one important thing. Kanchan and I, during our research all over the world, have not met any community radio broadcaster or let's say station manager who does not, within the first 5 minutes of our conversation, does not bring up sustainability as a problem. Whether it is Australia, UK, Africa, India, 5 minute baat karo unke sath, they'll start saying funding is very difficult. It is so difficult to run the station. We are struggling to keep volunteers. That is a common complaint everywhere. Now, community radio station, the policy guidelines tell you, is not for profit. But we had a great Sri Lankan friend and mentor, Mr. Jayavira, who was at UNESCO. I always used to love his saying that not for profit doesn't mean for loss. Yeah, you need to be sustainable, right? You need to run the station, keep it running. So how do we get financially self-reliant? The vice chancellor is currently nice. The registrar is very favorable to IMC and the station. They will dole out some money initially. Will they do it forever? We don't know. I mean, what is their commitment? What are the budgets like? So soon somebody, finance officer will say, aren't you allowed advertising? Why are you not raising advertising revenue? And who will give advertising to community radios? It's not easy. Yeah, especially if you are running a community radio station in interior Bundelkhand. Who are your listeners? They're all poor people who don't have any money to buy anything. Who is going to advertise to them? क्या फायदा होगा उसके साथ? Nothing. So advertising is a very challenging issue. But if you are in an urban area, one could try and see. But one should also have a set of codes and ethics about who you take money from, what kind of advertising you are allowing, because it is meant for communities' welfare. It is for the common good of the people. You make sure nothing that you are broadcasting harms people. You don't advertise foods that harm children, people's nutrition. I mean, some ethical codes that community radios must have, right? The policy guidelines now say what, 7 minutes? Or has it been gone up till 12 minutes now? Now it is about 12 minutes to an hour's broadcast. You can have advertising. I don't know of any community radio station in the country that is able to get even 5 minutes. But government feels good by saying we are giving you 12 minutes. You know how much it is? 12 minutes in 1 hour of broadcast. It is a lot of time. It's not easy for even commercial guys to raise that kind of advertising, but it is allowed. Yeah. And you can write projects, for funding agencies, donor agencies. You can say, we are doing this programming on this kind of community, can we seek some funding? It could be Social Welfare Ministry. It could be from UNICEF, UNESCO, whatever. Through radio content, we would like to work for the welfare of this community. There are agencies like that, so you need somebody who can pull off good project proposals, and generate funding. People can also donate. In the listening community, that one station I mentioned in Brisbane, that weekend I was there, people were calling in, pledging donations. They kept the microphones open, the speakers open for people to pledge. People were calling from the US saying, I listen to this station on the internet. I keep in touch with home because of this station. Here is my $20. So one could raise funding through donations from the listening community. And there are other interesting ways. For example, in some radio stations, they create a card that says if you are a member of our radio station, you get a card that says you are a friend of MANUU Radio. Okay. And you work with local businesses around here in Gachibowli, Toli Chowki, wherever. So that those businesses, if they produce this card, give a little discount to that consumer. That is the business's contribution to your radio station. Yeah, so all kinds of interesting ways that one need to find to generate revenues. The ultimate goal is to be self-sustaining. I know of very few stations that can claim to be 100% self-sustaining. Either the NGOs support them or the educational institution supports them and so on. But you should keep trying. Yeah, how do you become self-reliant? Transparency and accountability. Educational institutions anyway have to produce their annual reports and financial statements in academic council meetings, executive council, and so on. So we are okay. But especially NGOs and others also need to be transparent about, you can't preach transparency to other people and you are not transparent yourself, right? Where are you getting your money? What are you spending for? Should be available somewhere if the public wants to check. Yeah. The last thing I'll mention, and I'll stop, is this is a process of self-assessment. And we call it SAPR, self-assessment and peer review. Yeah. Now, peer review meaning, if I am a radio station that wants to assess my performance myself, I can invite 2 or 3 other stations to come and sit with me. That is a peer review. So supposing you are doing something here, you can call University of Hyderabad, the Bhopal Hyderabad station to join you, Charminar Radio, somebody to join you, whatever, to sit with you, over a couple of days. As you are doing your self-assessment, the peer reviewers sit with you, not as external inspectors, but to share their experiences. When you talk about content sharing, somebody will say, hum log aisa kiya last year. We got funding from this, we got programming from Amark. They'll give you ideas. And maybe you have some good experiences, good practices. They take back those good experiences with them back to their station. This is the idea of co-learning that I mentioned initially, right? So this whole methodology of assessment is self-assessment and with the help of peers. And at the UNESCO chair, actually, we trained a lot of community radio station representatives to become peer reviewers. What are the do's and don'ts? How do you do? You are not there for inspection. You need to sit there humbly, learn from them, and you share your experience, that kind of thing, right? And they also help in writing up a report eventually. Yeah. So the main advantage of CRCIT is that it is not prescriptive. It is not saying that there is only one way of doing things. It is saying there are some ways of doing and there are some better ways of doing things. How can you move towards the better ways? Right? That is the logic of this toolkit. Yeah, it is modular in design, meaning there are 9 parameters. If your station decides, I will only look at content sharing and financial sustainability in this round of assessment, you can just take those 2 and look at it, how you are doing. No, if you want to do an exhaustive review, you can sit for 2-3 days and you need to call your immediate stakeholders, community members, your management committee, sit together and assess yourself, looking at all the 9 parameters. Where you are doing well, where you are falling short, how you can improve further, is something that you are deciding among yourselves without any external donor-driven evaluations. Yeah, these are all details of how you do the process. Yeah, I can leave these PPTs with Rizwan Sahab, so can be shared if anybody is interested more. Um, yeah, so the station team can look at the views expressed by the peers, and they can set their own goalposts. For example, they realized they have very little content for children during the process. They can tell themselves, in the next 6 months, I'll at least have one show for children. Yeah, and it's a goalpost for itself. Nobody needs to tell them, right? They decide, and so on. So that's what I mean by goalposts. It must include a realistic timeline, not like you say, sometime in my life I'll do children's programming. You set a timeline for yourself. In the next 3 months, right, I will do a children's programming, because you got feedback also from the community that हमारे बच्चे सुनते हैं, but there is nothing for them in your station, right? Yeah, I'm going to stop here. Ultimately, the aim of the peer reviewers and the self-assessment process is to forge what we call a community of practice, meaning these are all co-practitioners along with you. By sharing experiences, content, ideas, you are forging a common community of practice of all radio broadcasters, right? That's the goal. Yeah. So I'll stop here. If you have questions, I know I probably rushed a little bit, but hopefully you got an idea. These toolkits are available to download, I think, online.
Sir, I have a question. So, is there any mechanism from the government side to monitor the content of any CRS?
Monitor content.
Content of like that is being transmitted or broadcast by any
So,
community radio station?
yeah, I don't know if Amit ji is listening to this, but it's not easy to monitor content on FM radio. FM radios are hyper local, especially community radios. They are allowed only 50-watt transmitters, right? People beyond a particular zone of listening can't listen to you unless you are also doing live streaming, and it is available on the internet. I can't monitor what you're doing. Now, given that, the ministry has come up with a very complicated monitoring idea. I don't know how well it is running. I think somewhere in Faridabad, somewhere they have a content monitoring evaluation kind of a unit, especially for television. So there are hundreds of TV monitors with channels, and there are people who are paid to sit and watch it every day to monitor them physically. And they tried to do the same thing with radios. But with radio, the problem is, if I am a small station run by an NGO somewhere in interior Jharkhand, I don't have any connectivity. Power only is a problem. How do I do live streaming? So it's very difficult. So sometimes the ministry says, please send us the 6-month-old programs. It's a requirement also in the guidelines. Now it is 3 months. That you need to keep content for 3 months, because you don't know when Amit ji will ask for the content. Right? So that is one way of
So
monitoring.
they have to preserve their content
least
for
3
3
months.
months.
At least
for
3
3
months.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sir, as community radio is meant for awareness, what is the chief concern of UNESCO in this perspective?
So, I'm not a UNESCO staffer, although I do a lot of work with UNESCO. UNESCO's larger goal in the field of communication and media is to promote the idea of plurality of media institutions in any society and diversity of media. So UNESCO is very big on freedom of expression, free speech, and if there is media, that there be diverse media, right? Including community media. That there's not just commercial media, there's not just government media, but there is also place for media run and managed by the communities. That is the larger goal of UNESCO's communication and media thing. And they also want constant training, capacity building. For example, last few years, they have been focusing a lot on fact checking. How do journalists learn how to do fact checking? They are now getting into AI. So UNESCO is constantly trying to improve the media landscape of the world. I mean, how does the world become more pluralistic? Multiple kinds of voices. Because if you watch our television, news in the evenings, God forbid if anybody is still watching, there may be 300 channels to watch, news channels, and you are trying to switch one news channel to the other. They are all doing the same thing. There is no diversity. One anchor shouting at a bunch of talking heads, right? And very often, when I switch channel from X channel to Y channel, the same talking heads are coming there also. Because they finished in this studio, they move to the next studio. They don't even change their shirts very often. There is no diversity of content at all. It's monotonous, monolithic kind of content. The idea of community media is that we bring in diversity of content, diversity of languages. I mean, in India, we say 20 odd languages constitutionally recognized, but there are hundreds of languages. We are doing some work with stations that broadcast in Santhali language. A station in Brahmaputra Valley is doing broadcasting in Hajong language. I didn't even know it existed, and so on. Now, that is the plurality of the media sphere, not just in the dominant languages, but multiple languages. So our dream when we started the community radio movement was that we get into a car and drive north to south, east to west. Every few kilometers, I can listen to a new community radio station. That was our dream. It hasn't happened. We still have only about 500 stations. Maybe when we get to 3,000, 4,000, that might happen. Speaking in a different language, singing in a different language, reflecting the diversity of the country. It can't be one nation, one language. Yeah, it has to be one nation, multiple languages. That's our reality. And community radio is the right medium for doing that. Yeah, Ramaraga.
Sir, you mentioned in passing that this Bowl Hyderabad that you are handling is not quite running well. Can you elaborate on that so that your feedback will be helpful for others?
I am part of the department which hosts the station, so it's a bit of a confessional thing. I think our over-reliance on the media students to run the station, I think wasn't a very clever thing to do. I think we haven't done enough to involve the rest of the university students, 6,000 of whom are there, and members of the community to come and do. We had a few, but not too many. I think we failed in that. And what happens is the students come and go. They finish their course and they leave. A new set of students come, who again need to be enthused about the station. You have to train them, get them ready. It's a constant process. Yeah. If you depend only on students, it's not going to run. The second thing is we have had technical problems, Ramaragaru, with the frequency. There are now stations around. There is one station in Kukatpalli area run by that engineering college, which is also broadcasting on 90.4, which it can if it is beyond the listening area, but somehow that started clashing with our frequency. And we haven't been able to get that cleared still. So there's still conflicts. So people are not sure whether they are listening to us or to that station. So there are some issues like this, so there are some efforts to revive and maybe MANUU radio will inspire us. once you go on air, we'll start using your station to tell our people to get their act together. Yeah. Yeah.
So, sir, as per you, what is the main factor that affects sustainability of any community radio channel? Is it the lack of volunteers or the funds?
No, you're right. I mean, volunteers is an important issue. We always say that don't reduce sustainability question only to financial sustainability.
Exactly, sir.
That is one kind of sustainability, but primarily you must have what I call social sustainability, community sustainability. If nobody listens to your station, nobody cares about your station. Yeah, you declare one Sunday, it's a open house, anybody in the community can come to my station, take a look at your station, all that, and hardly anybody comes. Then you wonder, are we really sustaining socially? Right? So you need to build good social community sustainability at the ground level so that people think this is my radio station. Right? They speak for me. And then financial sustainability can follow. If you have that, I'll dip into my pocket and give you some money from time to time. There are communities, poor communities, that bring a couple of kilos of rice and give to the station. In a lot of interior parts of North India, because they are saying this is what we can give you. So that is their contribution, right? Because they feel it is a apna station. Hai.
Yes.
And we cannot allow it to die.
Yes.
Right? So the sustainability is a very difficult terrain, and we can't romanticize community radio beyond a point, because sustainability is a real issue, and financial sustainability is an issue. Yeah, but you are also supposed to be independent, an independent voice of the community. And if you depend on one single source for all funding, can you be truly independent? So the station needs to have a diversity of funding sources, that you don't become a mouthpiece of one particular agency that's giving you all the funding. Then people might say, आप तो UNICEF रेडियो चलाते हैं और सरकारी रेडियो चलाते हैं in the name of community radio. So make sure that you have diversity of funding sources so that you can retain your independence.
So, sir, as I worked with a private FM channel, I know that, our listeners used to feel really like cringe because we used to post so many ads, advertising,
I know.
and we used to actually, sometimes cut a very beautiful song in between just to play those ads. So I think this is one pros that, any community radio can actually work upon.
Yeah. No, commercial stations have all kinds of issues. I mean, now stations very proudly announce that less talk and more music.
Yeah.
So there's constant music, and in between some young people come in and say something. I mean, often doesn't make sense
Just
to me,
give personal
but
touch, yes, sir.
yeah,
Yeah, we used to give like only 30 to 40 seconds to speak in
Correct.
between.
Whereas community radio should be about talk, should be about
Talks.
conversations, dialogues, let people come and speak and talk and discuss, and
But they don't do it for free, sir. That's
Yeah.
the problem.
correct. Okay, I am getting hungry. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pavarala, sir. I think we couldn't have had a better resource person for this lecture, for which the topic was monitoring and evaluation of community radio stations' impact. I would like to congratulate you for this, sir. You covered so many parameters like business and sustainability, technology sharing with the community itself so that it empowers them to build a better radio station, networking and content sharing. Like, for example, Radio MANUU can team up with Bol Hyderabad and come up with something. And also you tapped into that gender factor that ma'am was testifying to. Ma'am, and so we'd like to inform you that among the 30 programs that we've of different genres that we've formulated to launch in our radio station, one of which is Saheli Samvad. It's a women empowerment program, and for which we've had almost the most number of programs produced for that. So that's a testimony to that fact.
There is also one
Yeah.
little thing I should have said about women.
Yes, sir.
Some stations think they are doing something on gender
Huh.
by creating a special women's program. Jahan they will be talking about cookery and recipes and that kind.
No, sir. So it's a.
There should be gender in every conversation.
True, sir. Very true, sir. So there's this organization, an NGO called Rubaru, and our Department of Women Studies has teamed up with it, and they're excellent resource persons talking about gender violence, everything they're talking about, and it's basically empowering women in the society. And also now, sir, to humbly and very sincerely, I apologize for not having been able to introduce you for this lecture. If you allow me, then I can do it now. So I'm now honored to introduce Professor Vinod Pavrala, the UNESCO Chair on Community Media at the University of Hyderabad. Professor Pavrala has been a leading advocate for democratization of airwaves in India for over a decade. He played a pivotal role in shaping the national policy that granted community radio a presence in India's radio spectrum. As the founding president of the Community Radio Forum of India, Professor Pavrala has actively contributed to creating alternative media platforms for marginalized, predominantly rural communities. His highly regarded book, Other Voices, The Struggle for Community Radio in India, co-authored with Professor Kanchan K. Malik, who's here with us. Can we have a round of applause for her? Chronicles grassroots efforts to establish community-driven media spaces across the country. Professor Pavrala's academic journey is equally remarkable, with dual master's degrees in sociology and communication and a PhD from the University of Pittsburgh. He has taught at various prestigious institutions, including the University of Pittsburgh, Virginia Tech, and IIT Bombay, and has held various leadership roles at the University of Hyderabad. Notably, he has served as the head of Department of Communication, the Dean of Sarojini Naidu School of Arts and Communication, and the Director of International Affairs Office. An influential voice in media education and policy, Professor Pavrala has been a visiting fellow at Princeton University and was invited to address the International Communication Association's annual meeting in Boston in 2011. He continues to serve on several university boards of studies and national committees on media education. We are privileged to have you with us, Professor Pavrala, and I'd like to further congratulate Mr. Rizwan and Dr. Imtiaz for organizing this and tapping into this gold mine of information that we have with us. Thank you so much. But it was necessary. Thank you so much, sir.
So we are waiting for lunch now. Only half